want to thank you for joining today. And I think, Matt, you want to introduce Brittni and maybe Influence & Co. a little bit and kick us off?
Happy to. Yeah, Brittni is a former... go ahead.
If we could ask quickly that everyone just mute themselves. We'll use the chat for questions for Brittni until the end. Then there'll be some open Q&A time after she's done presenting. So, Matt?
Yeah, no, happy to. And I'll let Brittni obviously talk a little bit more about Influence & Co. and herself and whatnot too. But from my perspective, Brittni's a former colleague of mine as of a month ago. I just started my new gig at Deal Machine, but Influence & Co. I was there for 8 years. It's a content marketing and PR firm, really helping companies turn their expertise into influence. So, turning their knowledge into great content, and then having the right distribution methods to get it in front of their audience online and drive inbound business from that. Brittni will be speaking on various things marketing related, around that and how to build your influence like that. But, I know I was there forever. Brittni was always an absolute rock star. Like, she is phenomenal at all things content, SEO, PR, just anything in that world. She was one of the first people I thought of for these lunch and learns. So, I wanted to give her the floor, and she's been at Influence & Co. for what, 6 years, 6 years, Brittni?
Yeah.
So she's seen it grow, quite a bit too. So she brings a ton of knowledge and expertise to the table, just phenomenal at what she does. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy, what she has to say today. So I'll let her kind of jump in a little bit. Feel free to use the chat to keep it interactive, and, she can jump in and answer questions there. But, it's great to see everybody today.
I cannot promise that I will live up to all of those things, but I am going to talk a little bit about how to build influence specifically through content. I will be totally transparent that this is sometimes one of the least sexy topics because it's not overtly flashy. We're not talking podcasts and YouTube channels and things that I think are pretty hot right now. We are talking about the consistent development of solid content that provides quality for your audience and then builds kind of an influence loop for yourself. So that's kind of what I'm talking on today. We're going to get a little bit more specific to how SEO plays into that. So I'll define some of those terms. If those are terms you're pretty comfortable with, great. Hopefully you still learned something today, but that's going to be kind of the center with which we chat today. I'm going to share my screen, which I feel like is like the rallying cry of 2020. Can everyone see my screen? Just a second. All right, hopefully you can all see my screen. Matt, will you nod at me if you can see it?
Got it. Yep, good to go.
Because I can't tell. Awesome. So today we're talking about, like I said, how we turn expertise, so the thoughts and the subject matter expertise that you guys have, into influence, specifically through the lens of how search optimized content plays into that. If you are unfamiliar with SEO, that term means search engine optimized, which means we are creating content, understanding that it plays nicely with certain algorithms for search. So I won't get too into the weeds with that. We will kind of be touching on it, but I do want to talk tactic. Hi, my name is Brittni. This is my dog, George. He is also behind me. You will probably see him at some point. He is virtually silent, so I don't think we'll be hearing from him, nor does he have much interesting to say. I have been at Influence & Co., as Matt said, for almost 6 years now, so I have a little bit of working knowledge on content and how these things play together. Super excited to dive into it. So let me start with just a thesis statement. Content marketing is really important to building influence. Why I feel like this needs to be said is because for some industries like private equity and even venture capitalism, a lot of times when we talk to our clients that are in those two spaces specifically, or really anything finance related, they are under the impression that because so much of what they do, and this could be true for some of your fields too, so much of what they do is word of mouth and relationship building, that a lot of the pushback that we hear on strategy is, hey, our audience is just not searching the way that other B2B companies are searching, or either other audiences are searching. And I would say that's probably not true. It is probably true that people are not looking for a VC directly through organic search, but that doesn't mean that content doesn't play a role in how you showcase your expertise to your market. So if you are in that kind of mindset of, oh, all of our clients come to us through referrals, or through the relationships that we've built, that's awesome. This is still really important to your salespeople and to your overall persona of your brand. So this is still going to be relevant to you. And I would also challenge that, especially during pandemic times, those one-on-one relationships get harder and harder to build through a screen, which means you're relying on content to do some of that selling more than ever. So bear with me, because through an evolving field and through digital transformation and a couple other hot topics, this is going to be happening regardless. So we want to do it well. This is where I have to throw a couple fun stats at you, because it's necessary for me to back up what I'm saying with statistics. These are from a couple years ago, but I still think they're important. The majority of the buyer's journey happens before someone actually talks to you, regardless of what field you're in. This is true, right? They've done a lot of their research before. By the time they're talking to you, they probably know who your competitors are. They've done a little digging on what you're capable of versus what other people are capable of. Most people, 71%, are actually consuming content during the buyer's journey. So we know that they are actively reading. And even if you feel like you're in an industry where they're not, they are, it just might not be the places that you're expecting. Somewhere they are getting their information, likely from the internet. Even if someone is pointing them directly to your website to check you out, they are still likely digging around, doing some cross comparison, etc. When it comes to building any type of influence through your content and just digitally in general, these are usually the three kind of buckets that people are thinking across. Are you trying to actively generate leads with your content? Are you trying to build out thought leadership? Or are you trying to optimize for search? We would say those are different in that a lot of clients will come to us and say, hey, our goal for this year is to build a more robust pipeline. All right, that's probably lead generation. Or it could be, we are a best kept secret and we don't want to be, and I need to be more visible in my space. We are actively doing lots of great things, or we are brand new and we need more credibility. That sounds like thought leadership to me. Or it's, we need to be really competitive, or we need to get really granular into our buyer's journey to make sure that people are finding us for the right reasons. All right, that's SEO. So people tend to put these three different topics, and you might be thinking of your own goals and how they fit into those things. Again, I'm guessing that they are probably aligned with one of those. In reality, thought leadership and SEO are what get you to lead generation. So regardless of what you feel like your main goal might be, all of these things actually play really nicely together. Most people are going to be happy if they're doing lead generation. And the kind of common misconception here is that if you're doing lead generation, you are developing happy customers. That may or may not be true depending on what kind of content you're putting out there, but that's a topic for another day. We're going to specifically focus on how you build your thought leadership through content. So the way that SEO intersects with thought leadership overall, and let's broadly define thought leadership really quick, because that word gets thrown around a lot, right? You guys have probably heard it 5 times in the last week. Nod with me if this word is incredibly overused in your industry. Yes. So we would define a thought leader not just as a subject matter expert, right? There are probably lots of experts in your field. There are probably lots of experts in your company. You yourself might be an expert. How you package that expertise and how it is perceived by your customer base, that has more to do with thought leadership. So while you might own the expertise, if people don't actively think of you when problems or solutions or your industry comes up, you're not really a thought leader. You're just one of the many experts that are out there. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have influence either. It just means that you own expertise. So we have to put all of those things together so that you're actually getting recognition for that expertise. I would also argue that thought leadership content overall does not make people nod their heads, right? If you read an article that I wrote on this topic and it made you nod your head and say, oh, that's really interesting. Or if after this particular presentation, you said, that was interesting, but it did not make you think, oh shoot, I've been doing something wrong, or this was a really strong stance in the space, or I need to change something, then I did not provide you thought leadership. I just provided you some thoughts and feelings, which may be okay for this format. But my guess is if you want to drive influence that ends up bringing you actual sales, you need to do more than head nodding. You need to actually resonate with something that makes someone feel like they need to change. So when it comes to organic search, we are looking to take your thought leadership and build out awareness, make more people aware of who you are. We want to establish credibility in your space. That hits on what I was just talking about. I am the expert at this and I can help you. And then of course, get audience engagement. Not only can I help you, but you now want to come to me for some of these insights so I can help solve your problems. You also need to then reach more audiences. How this all works together has to do with a ton of different channels, and this is a whole topic for another day, but I'll put it simply. When it comes to organic search, you have your brand, it sits over here in this little ecosystem and can be kind of a echo chamber, right? You have your website, you have your immediate network that might include visitors that you already have on site, your own employees who visit your website, but what you need is more people to find that. So we can't just do that simply by creating content. It has to be really specific to what audience members are looking for, and then it has to be distributed across other channels. This graphic on the right is meant to show you that while you might create the content on your website, it cannot simply exist there and then generate any type of influence, right? It has to be shared out on multiple channels. It has to be repurposed across newsletters. It has to be findable via the almighty Google or whatever other service that 2% of you might be using, like Bing, or if you recently watched Social Dilemma like I did on Netflix, maybe you're like completely abhorrent to Google, which is totally fine. Again, topic for another day. How all these things work together is largely through consistently driving back to your brand. So for example, this image is a funnel image. You're probably pretty familiar with the basic idea, but what I'm trying to show you is that all of these things are very top of funnel concepts that all play together. So on one side, we have social media that does some of your amplification for you. It gets you out there. It can be a primary driver for traffic to your brand, and it can be a way for you to share expertise, but in snippets. We also have some of the deeper forums, paid advertising that you can do, again, driving some of those vanity metrics onto your website. These are all ways that you can be interacting. You might also choose to get yourself on a review site. You might be doing newsletters. All of those are great. Another way you might be driving influence is through some very specific types of publications. You might have a column, you might be writing content for these different media publications that are now establishing you as a credible source for that type of information. All of these things make you more visible and kind of get that top of mindness that you need to drive influence. And again, my assumption, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but when most people say we need more influence in our space, what they actually mean is we need to be more visible and we need people to know who we are so that they naturally come to us in order to become a customer. So the value of me being out there in newsletters or on social media or whatever is that people would come to know us, trust us, and then come be a client of mine. That is my assumption. If you have a different type of goal, fascinating, tell me what it is, because if it's not related to lead generation in some capacity, I would be surprised. However, for some people, they have all the right leads. It's just a matter of educating them more clearly. So that could be the case. And I can't see your chat. So if you're all like, no, that's not my goal, I can't see. And I'm going to keep rolling on my train and take questions after. So like I said, all of these things kind of work together in order to drive people toward you. Once they are there, it's really important that they're finding you for the right things. So these are all kind of some metrics that we look at to understand, are we actually reaching the right people? Organic search allows us to see that we're ranking for the right things and that people are finding us with the right terms. That is, in its most basic concept, what keyword research is. Keyword research lets you see, what am I naturally ranking for? How are people finding my website? What are my competitors being found for? What should I be found for that I'm not really thinking of? If you guys are familiar with a very broad topic of SEO, you may be thinking, oh, I need to make sure that I show up for exactly what I do in my exact brand name. That is true, but that assumes two things: that people already know what your brand name is and that people know exactly what you do. And for some of you guys, what you do is fairly complex, or it needs quite a bit of explanation, or it's very, very niche. And if those things are true, then the type of keywording that you do is going to look different than simply, I want to make sure that I show up for Influence & Co. I'll use ourselves as an example. Yes, we want to show up if you search Influence & Co. However, we don't want to show up for something like influencer marketing, which is not what we do, but is closely related to us. That gets complicated. We want to show up for things like content marketing. How do I make a solid thought leadership strategy? So we just have to think a little bit differently about what we're ranking for. My guess is that if you talk to your salespeople and you ask them, hey, what are the common questions coming up in the sales process? You would find a lot of great fodder for the keywords that you should be ranking for, and they may even be a little bit peripheral to what you think you need to be talking about. Here's just a quick example of what this normally looks like. We are looking for longer terms, right? We want to better understand how people are searching around these things. Now, if you look at some of these keywords on the left, and this is for a consulting firm, these are odd terms, right? Like if you were to think, oh, consulting term, I probably want to rank for a top consulting firm. Yeah, if that's what you're searching for, but a lot of times this may happen to you guys. how people find you is that some junior or lower level member has been told, hey, I need you to go research 3 different vendors that do X, Y, and Z, or I need you to find me someone that does this. Can you help me do that? And then they are tasked with that. Or they are looking to solve a really specific problem. And instead of actually knowing that they need a consultant, they are searching for things like toxic leadership, ? Am I a toxic leader? If you have to ask, that's probably your answer. But all that to say, we have to capitalize on these kind of sub questions that people are asking that get us to the heart of it. A lot of our clients, a lot of people that we interact with, they make a lot of assumptions about what they think their audience already knows about them. And part of the reason they do that is because they want to hit at the bottom of the funnel and they completely ignore the middle and top. I understand that. Sir, do you have something to say? One way that we've kind of used this whole system and organized it well for our clients and for you guys to be thinking through how you think about content is topic clusters. This is a term that I think was coined by HubSpot, or at least made more visible by them. And this is where you take a group of a piece of content or idea or concept and then kind of sync them all together. It's even better if it's around a cluster of keywords that you're trying to rank for. Again, very high level. If you were thinking about how I drive influence, the really unsexy answer is you create a lot of content that points to you as an expert on that topic. So a topic cluster is a high-level overview of a group of terms that are similar to each other that you guys can speak to. You can break these into tons of different types of content. They all link together. It's a really smart way to approach your content. So if you need to be known, if you're a HR platform and your big differentiator is really seamless payroll, then you want to make sure that any type of search that is associated to payroll or payroll processing or anything like that are associated with your brand, which means you're going to naturally create a ton of topics around that particular interest area. Here's what it kind of looks like in process. You create one big piece and then break it down into smaller topics. An example we use is one on, I said it earlier, but content marketing. Content marketing is a very broad topic. What does that even mean? So we might have a big piece on what is content marketing and then break it down into smaller pieces in order to let our audience self-educate. I imagine all of you guys can think of 2 to 5 big, broad areas that you need to be known for. You need your customers to know you do it. You need people to know that you can speak to it intelligently. You also need it broken down into smaller subtopics. That would fit in this kind of topic cluster idea. Content optimization is exactly what it sounds like. It's where we take content and actually make it searchable. I'm hitting hard on this because all of the content in the world, all of the great thoughts, all of the blogging are not really worth much to you unless they are optimized for the audience. This is something we hit so hard on, and why we love SEO is because it makes it way more apparent to your audience. You might have a topic that you feel is really compelling, but if you can't find that topic trending anywhere in keyword research, it may not be as compelling to your audience as you think, which means you may have to take 2 or 3 steps back to understand why it might be important and then optimize it toward that topic. And just a couple ways that we implemented just optimization. This was a client that we saw that was unable to rank for their terms. They were creating a ton of content, but weren't seeing any results from it. It was really frustrating for them. So we went in and redid their keyword research and realized that part of the reason is that they were just trying to rank for terms that were incredibly transactional. They're a wholesaler. They needed to rank for concepts and visions, right? This is going to be an expensive endeavor. So they needed to really go deep with what it is that they were providing. What we found is that most of their content was not written for their audience. It was written under the assumption that my audience wants to see all this product that I am capable of. That is not true. No one knew who they were yet. So we had to take it a few steps back and start writing more on these topics that you see at the very bottom here. So our dark wood floor is going out of style. Again, not the sexiest of topics, but for someone who can provide high quality hardwood floors, that type of question is going to eventually get someone to seeing their product and capabilities. That's the kind of thing that we found that their customer was actually interested in, not just the 17 different types of hardwood floors that they offered, right? That's building influence. They are allowed now to speak on the entire trend of hardwood floors, where it's going, what's the future of this space, and not just the simple product that they offer. Link building, this is the last thing I will hit on before we stop and take some questions now that I've hit you guys over the head with SEO. But link building is the process of gaining hyperlinks that point back to your website. It is great to create content on your own website. It's even better to have other people pointing to you as a resource. We recently did with a client, we saw that they, again, tons of content of their own, but we found that none of it was really well optimized toward their audience. So they were seeing tons of people come on the website. None of them were great clients. If you guys have run any paid advertisements, you guys have ever done Google AdWords or run PPC, what you may have found is from a metrics perspective, you got a bunch of people on the website, right? You probably saw a big uptick in visitors that month or quarter or whatever, and did not see many of them convert into actual customers. That may be because the traffic itself was not very qualified. They weren't the right potential users for you. So with this particular client, what we did was more of a linking strategy. We looked at other places where their audience was naturally going for insights, and we developed their influence by getting them consistently published there and then driving links to their highest performing pages. What this allowed them to do is become a leading voice in their space. It happened to be e-learning platforms. So both SaaS technology and in the e-learning space covered a myriad of topics, but they wanted to be seen as an expert there and they wanted it to show results. This is how they chose to do that. We, like I said, tapped into those audiences where credibility was already built. We got them published there and then linked back to their website in a natural way that made them more visible for the topics that their audience was interested in. Okay, it was a lot that I just threw at you with maybe 1 to 2 breaths that I think I took. So a couple things just to get you guys started. If this is the kind of thing that you're thinking like, yeah, I could probably benefit from, I don't know, more qualified traffic on my website that might turn into leads, which if you are not that person, again, fascinating, tell me more. Couple things that you guys can do. 1, think about long tail keyword research. What that means is that you guys are conducting search based on questions and intent and not just based on the 2 to 3 things that you think that you need to rank for. Again, we don't just need to rank for marketing service. Well, that doesn't tell us anything about what the person behind that search was searching for other than marketing services. We may or may not be able to fulfill that. I imagine you guys have some very specific questions that you could actually derive some intent behind. I'm also guessing that for some of your more sophisticated buyers, the way that you have to weed out some of your leads is based on what they know about you guys. So if you can find someone that's asking a more intelligent question around your industry, they're likely a better lead for you. That's how you align your thought leadership with what they're asking for, is you provide an answer to that question with your content. I would look at all your top performing blog content or just the pages that you guys have on site in order to better understand what's already engaging and see if that can be re-optimized, and audit your sales cycle. Your salespeople are usually your best line of defense to understanding, or your customer service people, because they know exactly what's being asked during that sales process. So if you can pull from them the ideas that are constantly coming up during the sales process, you can better figure out, what do I need to be seen as an expert at? That would help them overcome some of these objections, help my salespeople really make the case for what we're doing. All of that can be happening prior even to that first call. The last thing, just a personal plug, is to sign up for our newsletter, because we cover all of these topics all of the time. A lot of our blog content is geared toward helping you DIY some of these approaches. Whew, okay, I just threw a bunch of stuff at you. I'm excited to see what questions, if any, you guys have that I can answer specific to you. I'm not an SEO guru, but I can hopefully point you in the right direction. Someone asked, Tony, great question, had asked previously, where does Medium fit into this? So any of you guys using Medium, can you nod or shake your head if you guys are using Medium currently? Nodding. Okay, great. So Medium is a little bit complicated. Someone's asking where it kind of fits in and if it's helpful to just make those phrases searchable or how it fits into SEO. So I'll give you the quick and dirty. This comes directly from our director of digital, not just my thoughts, I promise. If your content only lives on Medium, then the only person benefiting from search terms is Medium, because it's their URL that's getting pointed to, not yours. So Medium can be really, really good for audience building, but it is not helping you necessarily from an SEO perspective, because your content is not the authority. It's the content that lives on Medium's URL. So I would recommend taking any content that you've developed for Medium and making it on your personal blog, and then routing it to Medium and routing it back to your blog, meaning having a link that's secured both ways. Otherwise, Medium's getting all the credit for your content and you're not. Make your website the authority first. Let Medium be a way to amplify that content rather than acting as the primary driver. Someone else asked directly how we help startups. Happy to take that question offline. It's probably a very specific question too to how we can work with you. So my email was on the slide deck. I'm sure Graham can send it out in a follow-up email, or I can drop it in the chat here. But if you want to talk specifically about how we've worked with startups, I'm happy to do so. I just don't want to give you all a sales pitch if you have specific questions. Another question that was also related to startups was about how long or the length of time we typically work with startups. And I'll just redirect that question to a broader question, which is usually more related to how long before I see results from something like SEO is usually kind of the heart of this question. Again, happy to talk to you guys directly about how we can help, but I will say this, and this is another very unsexy answer. SEO does not happen overnight. You don't start gaining authority and keywordings from a few posts or even a few dozen posts. It takes consistent, smart content in order to develop authority. As just kind of a general benchmark, it is probably going to take anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 months of consistent search engine optimization practices for you to start seeing leads come in from that content, just as a general rule. And that's without me knowing how competitive your space is and what kind of keywords you're trying to rank for. But as a general rule, that would put you in a safe place. That being said, if you've never done SEO and all of a sudden you start turning on that switch, you may see a bigger influence quicker simply because you haven't done it before. It's kind of like when someone starts lifting weights for the first time, you have that kind of like beginner high, or someone starts running for the first time and their times are really great. It's often just because this is the first time that you flex those muscles and it's responding really well. Thank you. Someone gave our blog a really big shout out and I appreciate it. The newsletter email, if you're asking how you can subscribe to our blog, if you go to blog.influenceandcode.com, there will be a subscribe button on there. We send out a newsletter, I think weekly and a daily option with all of our content rounded up by topic. So you guys can look under the SEO tab if you're interested in those. And we do offer tons of ways to DIY this. So you do not have to pull in a professional to do this. You guys can certainly try to approach this yourself. Any other questions on SEO or building influence that way? I want to make sure that I cater this to you guys. So if you have something specific in your industry or something I didn't hit on, I'm happy to answer it.
Actually, I did have a question. I'd prefer to ask you over voice if that's better.
Yeah.
So something that's interesting, we've been doing SEO and blog posting for like the last 10 months.
Okay.
And I was curious, what strategies do you have for startups that can kind of bridge that gap by maybe being part of Facebook groups with our customer persona or LinkedIn groups and building that rapport so that we're bridging the gap into when we become SEO relevant to at the same time starting that direct engagement using our content, if that makes sense. Can you talk a bit about that, like some shorter term strategies? Because you said it yourself, it's medium, long term for SEO and blog posts and content marketing.
Yeah, so great question. How in the short term can you ramp up some short wins when you are on that long journey of SEO, especially as you're trying to gain relevancy? How do I get this content in front of people in the immediate interim, knowing that it's going to take time to develop? Awesome question. And I love your idea about sharing it directly with Facebook groups. If you can find relevant, smaller micro communities, whether it's Facebook groups, whether it's LinkedIn groups, those are great places. And especially if your topics are fairly non-promotional, if they are genuinely helpful and written toward the audience, it gets easier to position those in those different groups. So yes, you can use those social channels. You can also try to pitch to any trade specific publications. That's another way that you can get out there further. You can pitch to any of your partners, see if they would be willing to link your blog post in their newsletters, especially because they likely already have a relevant audience for you. So if they're willing to do so, that's another great way that you can kind of amplify that. And you also could do a little bit of paid search. Paid search is one of the easiest ways, or any programmatic, to amplify a little bit of content and send, it's kind of like turning a little faucet on and off. That was Matt's analogy that I stole from back in the day, but paid search is kind of like turning a little faucet on, right? So if you wanted to amplify a piece of content that you suspect is going to do well, or you've already seen a little bit of engagement with, you could turn that paid on for a time being and see if you can funnel some more traffic as things start to build up. And eventually what you'll see is as your paid is ramping up and your SEO is ramping up, eventually those things will coincide. And that's the point at which you can say, I no longer need to pay for this traffic. I'm now getting it organically and I can turn this channel off.
Brittni, could I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, Brad, go ahead. I was just going to call on you.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got a couple questions. One, and I hope these are all relevant to others, but cutting through the noise. So right now, every company, every person on here is like, let's just throw more content out, right? And a lot of it's pretty poor. So Any recommendations on cutting through the noise right now? Specifically, like with us, our buyers are in the HR space, so there's a ton of headwind right now.
Gosh.
That's my first question.
Okay.
The second question is about backlinks and creating content with people. And my question is are all backlinks the same, right? Because you can create backlinks very easily, or you can put it buried in a lot of content. You know, the latter of those is sometimes more difficult, to be frank.
Yep. Great question.
I'll stop there for now.
You can ask more if you want, but I'll address those two. The second one's a little quicker, so I'll answer that one first. Backlinks, not all backlinks are created equal for sure. So my favorite kind of backlink, and the one that I think you would find most valuable from an SEO perspective, is a contextual backlink, meaning within the body of an article, there's a direct backlink either to your primary landing page or to a blog post that is naturally within the body of the article. The reason that those are helpful is that someone has to read that piece or at least skim it to want to click on that. And it's usually something that's going to further the conversation and allow you a direct call to action. So it looks good, it's contextually relevant, and you can usually assume safely that the person clicking on that link has actually read part of the article that you are being referenced in. So all of those are big wins. Also, they didn't have to go digging to find you, because a lot of times what happens is our clients will get published elsewhere and it might not include a backlink, and that puts the onus on the reader to go search for that company or person and find them. And a lot of people aren't going to do that if it's an additional barrier of entry, though we will also see direct search influence. So my favorite link is a contextual link. I like that better than, say, a bio link, because again, that means that someone had to scroll down to the bottom or look at the top and say, okay, where's this person from? Okay, great, I'll go check them out now. So contextual is great, happening within the body of an article. Second, the domain authority of that particular website that's owning the link is also important. So if you are securing links in super spammy, crappy websites or very, very low volume blogs that have less traffic than your own website or rank lower than your own website, you are not doing yourself any favors. So if you can increase the overall URL distribution of other places that are ranking toward or that are linking toward you, that would also be more valuable. Meaning if your own website has a Moz rank or a domain authority of anywhere between 1 to 20, and you can secure a link in a article or a publication or a online media channel of any kind that is above that 20 range, you are now kind of rising with the tide. So I would also consider those more valuable. Not that lower ranking links aren't not valuable. If they're in front of the right audience, they could still be good. But also if I look at the backlink profile of a company and I see that there are thousands of links in the 1 to 10 domain range, my assumption is you paid for a lot of those. They're scammy and fake websites. And Google's not going to love that either. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, cool. That was your second question. Your first question was, how do I cut through the noise? Which is kind of $1 million question. There's more content being created than ever before. There was a sales deck that Matt used to use back in the day, and this was like 4 years ago, that said something like there are, I don't remember what it was, like 1 million new blogs being created every minute or something like that. Do you remember
it's like
that?
2 million a day or something.
Yeah, something really terrible. And you're right, the HR space is also very saturated. And especially right now, you know what everyone wants to talk about? How to keep your employees happy right now. How do you process new health benefits? Blah, 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 blah. COVID-19 gave us a ton of new HR topics, very relevant to you. How do we work remotely now? How do we do it safely? Cybersecurity and working from home. I mean, goodness, it's just, like you said, super saturated. So a couple ways that I think that you cut through the noise. One is this broader conversation of organic search. So if you can create a really relevant piece that is actually dedicated to your reader, you have a much better chance of getting to them. Because I don't know about you, but when I do search, I look at kind of the meta descriptions, and if it looks off base, I'm already like, I'm not clicking on that. That's not relevant. I don't care. But if it looks really solid and I'm like, yes, this is the exact kind of thing that I'm looking for, I'm much more likely to engage in that piece. So one way is to play by the rules, have white hat practices when it comes to SEO so that you are actually visible, and make it visible for longer, more interesting searches. So if someone from an HR department is searching for, let's say they are looking for, how do I foster company culture now that everyone's remote? That's a long question. It's also not a very direct question. You could create content that would satisfy that would still showcase your expertise. So one, just create really good content. However, that's not quite enough. The second is to do what you can to become an authority on that topic. So if you can get published somewhere outside of your own website, that helps. And then 2, if there is a forum that exists, if there is a specific newsletter, if there are these micro communities that Ali was talking about, like a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group where you can be like, I know that you have thousands of options here. Let me just get quick to the heart of this micro community and speak to them. I also think that a lot of the trade publications or very industry specific publications get ignored on this effort. You probably have HR directors that read super niche content because they don't really care about all of the other stuff. They want to go like, hey, talk to me directly as someone who is in HR and healthcare. Make it really, really specific. And that way they don't have to shift through the really general stuff to get to the heart of what they're looking for. I know none of that is mind blowing because people are still going to create content that's all going to cloud some of that. But I genuinely think that the quality of your content is going to make it more likely to be visible.
Yep. Okay. My final third question, if I have permission to ask, but I want to make sure I give the floor away for a second. Okay, I gave away for 3 seconds. All right. So you hit on something that you didn't say throughout your presentation, and you hit on you said a CTA, right?
Yeah.
So I know this is an SEO conversation, but talk to me about click-through philosophy, CTAs as it relates to content, because getting someone to read, fantastic. Backlinks, fantastic. But at the end of the day, we want them to perform a certain behavior, right? Yes. So talk to me about CTA philosophy, forms, just that kind of stuff, because we've ran some publications recently and got a ton of visibility, a ton of impressions, all the right things, except conversions.
Yeah. Is there anything more frustrating than seeing all of the other metrics rise and then your click-through rate or any of your calls to action or conversions are still right here? It's so frustrating.
There is. It's your budget, right? It's like, well, that went away.
Yeah, it's super annoying. Okay, so Brad's question is on calls to action, meaning when you have a piece of content or anywhere on your website that is trying to push someone to make a decision that you might actually interact with a salesperson or a demo or something like that, right? So we're trying to figure out, one, I think your question is really around like, how should I be thinking about CTAs? What's actually going to work? Why is this not working? Probably a myriad of those types of questions. So I'll just give like a quick overview. One, my thought is always, was that CTA properly aligned with where this particular article is in the buyer's journey? So is the article itself assuming that this person is further along in the funnel than they actually are? If it's not, if it's like, no, this is a bottom of the funnel style article that we're getting a ton of traction on, then what is the call to action? Is it immediately to get on the phone? Maybe they're not ready for that. Can you do a demand gen style piece, like a white paper or a case study that's super relevant that you can half gate, that you might be able to get a download on? Also, how sophisticated is your lead form? I'd like to look at like what questions are being asked on that lead form, but I would be really interested in, okay, the next step I would like them to take is to get on the phone. But if they're not ready, can I get them to download a piece of content so that I can move them to a more differentiated workflow for as far as like an email drip campaign or a really differentiated salesperson that I can get them on the phone with from here? Like, how relevant is that next step to them? Because I know we want to get them on the phone, but what if they're not ready for a demo? What if they're like, I'm still poking around? All right, can we get them to poke a little bit deeper? Can we get them to exchange information?
What about if it's not so much a phone, but it's even just like a download, right? Because everyone knows that we're getting put into XYZ nurture campaign. You know, like we all know the sequences that happen once you put a certain piece of
100%. Yes. Yeah. And we've all probably downloaded a white paper and then ignored the drip campaign that came after it. However, I've also closed deals off of plenty of drip campaigns that happen post white paper. So it goes both ways. So if the question is, you know, how do we even get them to exchange the information to download the white paper? One, parse the white paper out into a blog series that naturally led them to the white paper, but gate the most juicy part of that content. So if it's specific data that you have, if it's insights that only your company can offer, if it's a survey that you guys did, something like that, that they cannot get unless they move through that whole process, or like, I read part of this blog post, I'm intrigued, give me the guide, the checklist, like make it something that they can immediately use so that they want to actually download it. And I think the more it is like geared toward a role specific checklist, guide, toolkit that they have to take and then apply somewhere, the more likely that someone will actually download it. And then if someone follows up and says, hey, did you apply the checklist? Was it helpful? Much more likely to answer to that in my experience.
Got it. Great feedback. Thank you.
There's actually a phrase that I like using. It says, give several deposits before asking for a withdrawal. So like give some share of content and then be like, hey, can I pick your brain about this problem you're having? And then just build on top of that. And that's something I've been doing, but it's not, I don't know if it qualifies as marketing 100%. It does, I guess, but it's also kind of a intersection of sales and marketing. So I don't know what you think about that.
No, I think that's great. I think you're spot on that you have to kind of like give 3 times before you ask. And I mean, Brad too, it could be a matter of like reevaluating some of those email drip campaigns and seeing if they're super like, hey, just checking in, just following up, like those types of things, then it could be too that the email copy could be a little bit more targeted and specific. There are lots and lots of things that could be going on there. So it is hard to say in a direct conversation, but those are my favorite things to try to dissect is what's actually going on here. Tony had asked a question. I don't want to miss it. So he had asked, when you make long phrases searchable, do you have to simply put a hashtag in front of the question mark, or how do you make it visible? And the way that you make a long tail query is what it's called, a long question searchable, is to make sure it's happening in the body of your article. So if you write a blog post, you want to take the question as it usually is seen, or the volume of the question in keywording. So this is how people are usually typing it into Google. It might have a couple variants depending on verbiage and first person or whatever, but then you want to make sure that that is naturally occurring in the body of your article, in the meta description of that article, etc. So it needs to happen verbatim and with a couple variations within your article. Whew, this is fun, guys.
I have a question, Brittni. Hey, this is awesome. So I know it's one thing to find if you're outsourcing and hiring a writer, ghostwriter kind of a person. I know it's like one thing to find a good writer, but another thing to find somebody who can write in somebody else's voice.
Yes.
How do you recommend vetting and finding someone who could be the right person for you or company?
Yeah. So your question is I imagine you have some pretty specific either personal or brand voice guidelines, and you need that to be able to come through with content. And the more you outsource it, the more it becomes a game of telephone and you start feeling like it sounds less and less like you. Is that kind of, yeah. So when you are looking for a partner that can execute across that, I can tell you some of the things that we put in place, but also what we look for too. One, have some really clear tone guidelines. So create a group of adjectives that you guys want to be known for, and then get even deeper. What are industry jargon terms that you love or hate that you would never say or that you would say? How academic versus how conversational do you want to be? And then give that writer 3 to 5 pieces of content that you guys have created that you really feel like emulates your tone. And then have them tell you, what do you think our tone is? And if those things, if the tone guidelines that you've created and what they regurgitate back to you after reading your content, if those are on par, now you can actually hold them accountable to keeping those things in line as they start to create content for you. My second piece of advice is, where possible, have your writer, rather than just writing a piece blank, have them ask you a few specific questions of your subject matter expert. So for example, if someone was interviewing me to write a piece for my company and I'm the subject matter expert, if they could ask me just 2 to 3 questions, like we're talking here, hey, Brittni, what do you think about call to action? Like, what should I be thinking about? And I just spit out all my thoughts. It's going to be much easier for that writer to get a feel of how I sound if they've seen me already think through the process. So where you can involve your internal experts, do so. And have one editor. If you can have one editor who owns those guidelines, have one person that it goes through who says yes or no, this fits. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Let's see. Jessica asked, how do you find relevant topics to create content for your client's audience? Hold on, for your client or for your client's audience, if you're the in-between. So I don't know which one you're asking, but either way, I'll give you a couple thoughts. How do you find relevant topics? As you guys can probably tell, I'm going to tell you keywording is going to help, but keywording specific to your industry. So figure out what you're already ranking for, look at a couple of your competitors and see if you can figure out what their content is ranking for. Look at publications that are popular within your client's audience that are niche and see what topics they are often covering. And especially, usually you can see how many articles, if you're on entrepreneur.com, you can see their top trending pieces and you can usually see how many each piece was shared. So let's say that you are for HR, let's say I'm Brad and I want to see what's trending right now in HR. I could go to the Forbes Leadership Council, which has an HR specific column, and see what's being talked about right now. and then draw some ideas from that. That's a great way to start. So you can do that. Keyword research is going to give you a more specific idea. And the next one is to, again, interview your salespeople. Ask them what they're seeing out there in the field.
Brittni, do you have other, and this was, I think, also asked in the chat, do you have other resources outside of Influence & Co.'s blog, which is great, of course, but do you have other resources you could point people to? Yes. And maybe as we get closer to wrapping up, maybe you could drop a few links of good additional reading in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. Search Engine Journal, the HubSpot blog, those are two of my favorites. Search Engine Journal does a really good job. Every week, on Wednesday, actually today, I just got the email, our director of digital offers 2 to 3 articles that he is really loving right now. Let me go see what some of those sources are so that I can share those. But I do know that Search Engine Journal is up there. I imagine there are a couple the Moz blog and some of their free resources are awesome. Highly recommend those too. For this general topic, I would definitely start there. Also, David asked a really great question about your law practice. David, shoot me an email. I will answer your question, but it's more involved than I think I have here in the last 5 minutes. Yes, Content Marketing Institute is great also. Thank you, Matt. This was super fun. I was afraid you guys wouldn't have any questions and I would just be speaking into the void. So yay for relevancy. That was great. If you guys have additional follow-up questions that I didn't get to, I know I mentioned this, but Graham has it and I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Brittni, real quick, who's your ideal customer? Who should we be referring to you?
Oh, what a great and wonderful question. My favorite question as someone on the sales side. Our best customer is in the B2B space typically. That tends to be the buyer cycle that we best understand. It tends to be a longer form buyer cycle that plays by some certain rules that we really like. And then someone who they could have an established marketing person or an entire department, and they often need to fill in certain gaps in between that. Those are all appropriate. They could have one guy that's drowning because they have to do everything marketing wise, or they could have a pretty sophisticated system. Either one would be fine as long as they are in the B2B space and have a functioning website and a functioning sales and marketing person at the very least. We are in a good position to help them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very selfless question on your end, and I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a little selfish. I've got a couple of founders I might need to send to you.
Great. We would love to help them. Guys, thank you so much. You listened to me talk for a very long time. I do not want to listen to the recording of this because I do not desire to hear my own voice, but I really appreciate all of your great questions. Like I said, super happy to take this conversation offline if you have some additional questions or resources that are more specific to your space that I can help you guys out with.
Yeah. And thank you everyone on the line who's referred us, like Influence & Co, have Influence & Co clients on the call, like all of that. So Brittni truly knows her stuff, as you can see now. Brittni, did you put your email in the chat, by the way?
I did. Somewhere.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just making sure everybody has that. So.
I don't see it.
Oh,
yeah, I'm not seeing it. Could you put it in again, Brittni?
Yeah, I actually just sent it to Tony, who probably already had it. So sorry, guys.
It also was on the email. She was CC'd directly in the email that I BCC'd all of you on as the reminder of this morning.
There you go.
Brittni, thank you so much. And as always, thanks everyone for participating in the community. I apologize. I actually have a 1 o'clock call, so I need to jump. Yeah, if anybody wants to stick around, they're certainly more than welcome to hang out. Thanks again, Brittni.
Any final questions? I'll hang out, and then otherwise, we can jump off.
Okay. Thanks again, Brittni.
Thanks, man.
Thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble for the last 45 minutes.
Great job.
Wow, this was awesome. Thank you.